Welcome to the 15th episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
This is the 15th episode of our podcast and I'm very happy because we are making steady progress through Hitchcock's filmography. And today I think we have a special treat, a film that has been underseen for a number of years. It was never lost, but it was not easily available for a number of years. Waltzes from Vienna. It's a film from 1934, a musical, a Hitchcock musical. So if that doesn't sound interesting, I don't know what would. I remember that when I was first interested in Hitchcock, this film was completely unavailable and it was always sort of a mystery for me, you know, this musical made by Hitchcock in the mid-1930s. Later on, it actually became available, but I do remember that in early 2000s, I was making big efforts to see it. I even reached out to the son of Michael Balcon, believe it or not, whom I emailed, John Balcon, and he replied by saying that he didn't have an access to a copy, but this is I wanted to see it so much. So today we'll discuss a film that is definitely unloved. It wasn't loved by Hitchcock. He was quite dismissive of it in his later interviews, and a musical that takes place in 19th century Vienna, which in itself I think is quite interesting. So this was the first time I saw the movie. This is probably the last Hitchcock. This completes the puzzle for me, I think. I might have seen fragments of it, but this was the first time I actually saw it from start to finish. How did you like Waltzes from Vienna?
Yes, this movie also finished my cycle of Hitchcock. I also saw it for the first time, and I liked the movie, and I think it was a great opportunity for me to, go deeper into 1930s musicals, operettas, and like this style of making movies that was only at the beginning of the sound period. I think this movie really belongs to that period, and I think it's not inept at all. I mean, dismissing this movie is kind of strange. It may not be the best of Hitchcock's British movies or even not at the top, but I think, it's interesting enough and it's very well made, I would say. So when I read these anecdotes that, Hitchcock in the middle of the production, he told everyone that he hates this movie. It's an anecdote that is distributed by the main actor, Esmond Knight, who's playing the young Johann Strauss. He wrote this anecdote in his autobiography. So it's kind of strange to me because I don't believe that. Maybe it's true, but I don't think Hitchcock would do that, saying something like that in front of his cast and crew. And the second thing is that, you really feel that maybe he didn't put all his heart into it, but I think he put a lot of his skills into this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and many commentators actually point out an interview that Hitchcock gave during the making of the film, I think in late 1933, in which he was speaking of it just as his next project. He was very invested in it. And I think the film speaks for itself. I mean, it is very highly crafted. I mean, it's not, a film like Rich and Strange or Number 17 in which we could sort of, discern this rather easy approach, not meticulous and, sloppy almost. This is not a sloppy film. It's a very highly crafted, beautifully costumed and highly artificial film in which many sequences actually, I think, took great pains to be made, to be edited, and it's a very carefully presented whole. So this was probably my biggest surprise with this film, that I thought, oh, this is probably this bad Hitchcock, which has some obvious flaws. No, I mean it's not a fresh film. It was probably stale at the moment of its making, but it is very, very, very beautifully crafted, and there are some almost experimental touches to it, which we'll discuss in a second. But basically, the plot is taken from an operetta, as you mentioned, a Viennese operetta that the subject of which is creation of the Blue Danube Waltz, and the son, Johann Strauss Jr., let's say, who is called Shani, right, in the film. He is rebelling against his father, who would like to see him play second fiddle, literally and metaphorically. And he is rebelling against this sort of stale, old composition that his father represents, and also he's caught between two women, one of whom is a countess, and she's the older woman, the more maternal figure, and a young woman who is the baker's daughter, Jessie Matthews, the biggest star of musical film at that time in Britain, who represents, well, youth, but also she represents the everyday. You know, she doesn't have much understanding of artistic matters. She would like to see Shani as a baker, basically. So, you know, a traditionally, let's say, bourgeois occupation, you know, small business, something that Hitchcock could relate to, while he would like really to be an artist. And there's also jealousy between the countess and the younger woman. So it's pure operetta stuff. Basically, it is, you know, light operetta in which we slowly witness the birth of Blue Danube as we know it, because this is, of course, in a way anticlimactic that we know Blue Danube before this movie begins. So we basically want to see Shani as he arrives at the melody and the rhythm that we know and presumably either love or are sick of.
Yeah, it's one of these musical pieces that you hear so often that you kind of start to hate it. Maybe it's like with Beethoven's Für Elise, right? Which is played so often, and sometimes even in Poland, at least, some people have it as their doorbell. So yeah, so it's a very, very famous tune. Of course, it's kind of anachronistic, but watching this movie, you also think about Kubrick and Space Odyssey, because he used this piece of music very eloquently. But basically, yes, as I think you described it, but I just wanted to stress that the character played by Jessie Matthews, so this Resi, she's a baker's daughter, to paraphrase Pagnol, you know. So we have this, her father is called pastry cook, which is kind of a funny expression. But yeah, that's basically what happens there. And I agree that the young Strauss, he wants to compose, but also there are many instances in the movie when he kind of, I think he plans to abandon his profession. He tries to lead this very bourgeois life, you know. He almost decides to be a baker, at least for a scene or two. So he's like in between, you know, these two, let's say, professions or these two visions of life. So I think besides everything, it's also a movie about the creative process, maybe not taken very seriously and deeply, but still it's there. And the most important element of the plot, at least when it comes to music, is of course the conflict between the old Strauss, the father figure, and the most important person in Viennese musical establishment, who dismisses his son's ideas and his son's will to compose. And on the other hand, the young Strauss is saying that, you know, the music must march forward, the art must march forward, which of course, when you think about it in the 1930s, and when you think about cinema, it kind of reflects what was going on there, right? That, you know, this need to maybe do something new, something fresh with sound, with cinema, which is still a young form. So I would see this like maybe subtle or almost subliminal parallels between, you know, Hitchcock the artist and maybe the young Strauss, who also, and both of them want to push their art forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in many ways, this can be read as a metaphor of Hitchcock or something that Hitchcock could relate to. I mean, young Shani is definitely caught between the world of domesticity and art, and this is something that he could relate to. There's also this sort of, shopkeeper's view that we also associated with Hitchcock, that, you know, there's the business of making art, but there's also small business of, you know, selling stuff. And Hitchcock grew up basically almost like in a bakery. There's also what you mentioned, the, you know, march forward of the art form. Hitchcock commented in an interview that he gave at that time that he would like to see music basically used in a more imaginative way in films. That he admitted that he was disparaging of music at beginning, that he only believed in the power of the image, the power of montage, of editing, but he said in this interview around the time of making of this film that he actually sees great creative possibilities in music, and especially in using counterpoint of music and image, something we will see in almost every Hitchcock film by setting a counterpoint between what we see and what we hear. So this is I think that Shani can be seen almost like a self-portrait of Hitchcock here. He is played by Esmond Knight, an interesting actor in that he's not immediately likable. He's not like it's not a smiley face. It seems like he's pouting most of the time. And his father is played by Edmund Gwenn, who will reappear in Hitchcock in Foreign Correspondent, and who is of course known mostly for his iconic role of Kris Kringle / Santa Claus in Miracle of 34th Street. So, but this is in the future. How did you like the ways in which the film incorporated music, since it is a sort of a musical? How did you like the musical element of it?
So, of course, Hitchcock wasn't right when he said that it's a musical without music. There's a lot of music, and as you mentioned already, many commentators state that this movie is actually the beginning of Hitchcock's work, or like his efforts towards integration of music and image and sound. So what comes next in The Man Who Knew Too Much, both versions, we have this musical finale. Then Rear Window, you have the composer who's composing the piece, which we finally see at the end. At least that was the idea of Hitchcock, that he said he couldn't, in Rear Window at least, he couldn't really pull it through with Franz Waxman. So yes, so there's a lot of music. I like this element very much. What I really think could be better in this movie, and I'm saying that after watching Evergreen with Jessie Matthews, who was really a star, and she was, I think, in Evergreen, which is considered the best British musical, at least of the 1930s, and it's really very, very good. I mean, I was surprised how good a movie it is, and she's great in this movie. It's by Victor Saville, also from 1934. So we have, and I think the Evergreen premiered like 2 months later than Waltzes from Vienna. And she's the focus of the movie, of Evergreen. She has great dancing parts and singing parts. Here she's really almost in the background. I mean, she's in the foreground of the romantic narrative, but she's not important as a performer or entertainer, I would say, in Waltzes from Vienna, which is a pity. And you can explain it by saying that Hitchcock simply didn't get along with her. He didn't like her. And I think that's my biggest trouble with Waltzes from Vienna, that he had really a top-notch performer. Let's just say that Fred Astaire admired Jessie Matthews, and there were some efforts made by studios to put them together in a movie. Really, I think that's not a like fantasy anecdote, but it really there was really something like that. So she was really good, but she never actually became recognizable or well known outside of UK. So she was really part of this 1930s UK musical scene, both theater and cinema. So that was what I missed. I'm not saying that I missed dancing, because in this, I would say, German style musicals, sometimes people say that Waltzes from Vienna is like, I think Patrick McGilligan described it as a glittering imitation of a German musical. I think he was referring to movies like the Congress Dances by Eric Charel, this tradition of German operettas, many of them taking place in Vienna, of course, as this ultimate romantic 19th century paradise, let's say, of artists and countesses. And it's also very close to Lubitschland, of course. But coming back to the topic, I think this movie belongs to this tradition, and there was never a lot of dancing or a lot of really what we could call Hollywood numbers, right, in this kind of musicals. So the singing usually accompanied other events. And in this movie too, we don't have, like, I think, a single dance number as far as I remember. But there is a lot of music, and the scene, of course, my favorite scene is the scene in the bakery when he's supposed to work, where he's supposed to observe the craft of, making pastry, making bread. But instead of that, he looks for the rhythm. He sees the rhythm of the work of bakers, and he immediately thinks about his waltz. So like this world of work, of blue collar, let's say blue collar work, and bakers connects to the world of artists in this quite beautiful scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also instructive to remember that musical was pretty young as an art at that point. It's only, few years that musicals were made, and many of the conventions weren't born yet. This is the time in the States when there was some excellent experimentation going on with Busby Berkeley and with Robin Mamoulian, Love Me Tonight, and Lubitsch, as you said, 1 Hour with You, and those operetta films with Jeanette MacDonald and Maurice Chevalier. So it was, I think, the time when musical was closest to operetta, or it was just a pure vaudeville anthology, let's say, like King of Jazz or others. But here it's definitely, and this is, I think, worth to remember, that there is a plot in this film, and it's not like musical numbers or even melodies strung together by a sort of a pretext setting in Vienna. There is a plot, and the plot is of the emergence of this melody. And in a way, it is a story of a creative effort. Many commentators link it very neatly to the Rare Window and to the melody of Lisa that is also being invented before our eyes, basically, that we see the emergence of melody. Other commentators also connected to Shadow of a Doubt and to this waltz that goes through the and we will talk about the waltz over there as well. But what I found really interesting is just how bitter and how strong actually are the confrontations between Shani and his father. They are not playing for comedy. It's not, Edmund Gwen is not a comical patriarch here. He's a mean father. He's really strict. He's really cruel towards his son. The scene of this humiliation in the orchestra pit when he, tells his son to play, it's a cruel scene. It's not a funny scene. He's not a, this comical, strong father. He's actually quite scary, and he is, until the very end, he is actually the only, sign of that we have of him changing is not real affection that he gives his son. It's this adding senior on his signature when he gives the autograph. So he is a quite terrifying figure, which is interesting if we connect it to Hitchcock's own experiences and to his family life, perhaps, especially since we also have this maternal lover in the character of Countess Helga von Stahl, right, who is played by Faye Compton. But
there is some sexual subtext to this.
Oh, of course, there is a jealousy. He, he lives a double life. Shani actually dedicates the waltz to two women in a very interestingly edited scene, which may point to Vertigo and other double romances. He actually plays the waltz, and it's so edited that one woman turns into the other, one musical sheet turns into another with another name on it, so it's from one lover to another almost. It's definitely, there's this theme of a double life being led. But what you said, I was trying, as I was watching, just to put myself in the mindset of someone in the 1930s. That was before other people made ironical uses of Strauss, like Kubrick in 2001, for example. That was a time in which this was legitimate adult or maybe family entertainment, to go to a movie like this, to hear the waltzes. That was before, we're being killed by every year on the 1st of January by the, broadcast of the Viennese, New Year's concert. So this was before, I think, the waltz has become as tired and chewed up as it is right now. And as such, I think it probably worked as this nice entertainment. I would love to see Evergreen. I never saw it, but I heard wonderful things about it. But it seems that sometimes the British directors are simply drawn to the world of the operetta. Michael Powell will make his Strauss movie in O Rosalinda. Mike Leigh will make a wonderful operetta film. But what I was wondering was this: if you found in Waltzes of Vienna any signature Hitchcock touches, something that would really connect, in your view, to how Hitchcock operates, to how he views the world, how he views the film subject. Were there any significant signature Hitchcock touches in this film?
Yeah, I found two shots that I liked that were very Hitchcockian, and I will address that in a second. I just wanted to comment briefly on what you said, and I agree with you that Edmund Gwen's character is really a bit frightening, which is interesting because he's cast against the type. And that's not his first, I think, Hitchcock appearance, because he was also in The Skin Game a few years earlier. And yes, the time distance between creation of the Blue Danube Waltz and the premiere of the movie was shorter than between us watching the movie from the 1930s, because I think this waltz was composed in 1867, so it's like 70 years between the movie and the waltz. So as you said, it's like it's still legitimate part of the let's say popular culture, or this popular high culture, we could say. So yes, that's certainly interesting. And Hitchcock touches. I think there were at least two striking shots for me. One was the scene in which the Jesse Matthews character is leaving the concert hall when they have this rehearsal, when the father has rehearsal, and this shot is very, very expressionistic, with her having this very tense facial expression, and the orchestra almost like playing some devilish music in this single shot. So it's very expressionistic, and it kind of draws us back to Hitchcock's silent movies, I would say. And there's also incredible comment about class differences expressed visually when the assistant of the count is down the stairs, very low. So he was beaten by the count and just fell from the stairs. And from down there, he's apologizing and he's saying, "Yes, master, yes, yes." And we see it. We just see the very top of his head, and we see this huge staircase being the arch Hitchcock theme. And up there we see the count. So it's quite simple, but it's this visual idea of showing the distance between them. And I would say why I think these touches are important is that they don't go against the movie, but they certainly seem like this interesting addition that could not be there, that they kind of disrupt the flow of this romantic narrative, of this melodrama. Of course, I agree with you that the relation between the father and son is very interesting, and it's certainly one of these castrating parent figures, right? We have this loving mother, so we don't have this abusive Hitchcock mother, but we have this countess who's a, let's say, more or less good mother, or turns out to be a good mother. But the father is really, he's very strict. So I would also say that's a kind of a Hitchcockian theme.
Absolutely, I agree. And there's also, I would say, the very first sequence of the fire brigade coming to, put out the fire may put us in mind of Blackmail, and the opening of Blackmail with the opening police raid. I would say that there are also, those sort of dirty jokes that Hitchcock loved to put into film. The fire hose, for example, spurting water like at the beginning, not very energetically. Those sexual innuendo in some of the conversations. What color is the Danube? What color is your bathing water? It's dirty brown. I mean, we know that Hitchcock loved toilet humor, so I think there's some of that fascination with feces. And I would also probably, if someone wanted to do a Freudian reading, and this is a Viennese film, but it's pre-Freudian almost, but the moment when Shani looks at the bread dough being churned, and suddenly the bread dough spurts on his face, and there's in Hitchcock there's always this adolescent fascination with all things that are suggestive either of feces or of bodily fluids. Yeah. So I would say that this is definitely something that he's playing around with, even if he doesn't know it. But there are those things that from perspective of time are actually, I would say, like completely offensive or like not as we say problematic, like the definitely the class distinctions within this world, those poor three scullery maids who are cleaning the floor in the bakery, and we don't even see their faces. They are just basically like props, like living props who are funny, and Shani is actually jumping over them as he is, in happiness. So basically, they are simply those, buttocks in the air. We don't even see the faces of those poor women. So this is something, of course, that in our Parasite-minded era we are much more aware of. But I what I think it's absolutely admirable is the musical sequence and the way that is cut to music, the performance of the Blue Danube Waltz. And of course, this is another obvious point that everyone is making, that this is like a preparation for The Men Who Knew Too Much, actually, for two versions of it, and to the big performance, the big musical performance in those films. But what I find interesting here is that in Men Who Knew Too Much, we didn't care about the musicians, right? We cared about someone who was in the audience, and the subject matter wasn't the art. The subject matter was that someone was being killed in the audience, right? So music was almost like a cover-up, like an addition to an exciting action sequence, which happens a lot in Bond films, for example. It happens, I hear, in Christopher Nolan's Tenet. But here it's actually the character of the conductor and of the composer who is working out his feelings through this music. It's make or break for him. It's, if the Blue Danube Waltz becomes a hit, then he becomes a man, basically. He becomes, he tears away himself from his father. And so there is personal stakes in his performance. In this way, I think it's completely different from the other musical sequences in Hitchcock, because there is this personal stakes. And what is really interesting, and I don't have any way of reading it, is that if we read this as him tearing himself away from the father, which he is obviously doing, then it's interesting that it's the mother figure that enabled this, because it's the mother figure who made father come late to the party. She held him up. So in a way, Shani becomes an independent man because this older woman helped him, to become. So you can put any sexual reading into it as you want, but there's no doubt that he would never become a full man had he not be involved with this older woman. So
yes, this is very interesting. So in a way, he substitutes one parent figure for another, and also
or he sleeps with the mother, as Freud would said.
Yes, and as some other characters from Hitchcock would like to do, probably in later years. So yes, but also there is this comment that is also often repeated, that it's one of the very first movies, or maybe the first Hitchcock movie, in which a woman has this power to arrange things, to do some schemes, to subvert the narrative and the real situation. So he really, the Countess in this movie, she really arranges everything, and she operates, let's say, from the back seat, converting her husband to help her, asking her servant to help her as well. So there is this person of power who's like working kind of in the very background. It's almost like some kind of like a conspiracy movie. Of course, it never, you never feel that, but when you think about Hitchcock's later movies, there is this feeling that this is this very important person who can arrange a lot of stuff. So yeah, I would say it's maybe one of these instances when a woman is a powerful figure in his movies. Although, as I mentioned, I think the character of Jessie Matthews could be at least equally strong or a bit stronger. She's really subordinated in this picture to the character of Countess, and it's also maybe because Hitchcock preferred the actress who played the Countess, because she could get on with his jokes. It's a part of the story of this movie that Jessie Matthews hated these practical jokes. Also, the actor who played Shani, Esmond Knight, he also didn't like the atmosphere on the set. So we hear these stories that maybe not everyone could really, enjoy working with Hitchcock, with his style of work. And maybe that's one of the reasons why in later years he really he was choosing, the cast and crew very carefully, and he knew with whom he would be comfortable with and who would be comfortable with him.
Well, I don't know how concerned he was about who would be comfortable with him.
Yeah.
I think that this remained a feature on his sets, that actors often felt abused by him. But yes, well, this I was surprised by how actually fast moving it is. It's a quite short film. It's under 80 minutes. It's it packs a lot, I would say, this whole creative struggle, and I would say also sexual maturation, because this is exactly what the film is about. If you look at some men in Hitchcock who never torn themselves away from their mothers, like Norman, of course, Bates, who becomes his mother, and
Grant in North by Northwest,
Robert Walker in Strangers on the Train. Then this Shani, who really does his best to sort of tear himself away from his father, and succeeds. And the father actually, and this is the ultimate fantasy, I would say, of someone who has those parents' issues, and I think everybody has, when the father actually acknowledges it. It's not only that Shani actually becomes a star, it's when his father puts in writing that I'm the senior, you are the junior, so we are two separate beings, two separate composers of talent and of stature. Then you can look at some of the fathers later on and in Hitchcock, and also interpret them through this lens. One also important name connected to this film, although he wasn't directly involved with it, is of course Erich Wolfgang Korngold, who at the same time was one of the absolute top composers of the Viennese scene. He will soon leave for Hollywood, and he will score Adventures of Robin Hood, which will basically change the history of film music. And before that, he did music for Max Reinhardt's Midsummer Night's Dream. But here he's also involved. He was involved with the play and with the orchestrations of the waltzes. I have no idea about orchestration, so I don't know how good it is. Apparently, the expert says that it's a wonderful orchestration. But would you say that this film put you in mind of hearing more waltzes from Vienna, or were you is it something that is really, really difficult to warm up to in our day and age?
As you know, approximately 10 years ago, I was crazy about classical music, but I was never crazy about waltzes. That's one thing. I think it's what I mentioned at the beginning, that this movie really belongs to the 1930s, is that people had this appetite for operettas then. Now it's so old-fashioned that I think for our generation, it demands some effort to really enjoy this kind of humor, this kind of trivial, stories made in this romantic, funny way. So I want to say several things. The first is I found somewhere this opinion that Hitchcock wanted to, once again, he was so brilliant that he wanted to subvert the German musical and by doing Waltzes from Vienna. But when I started to think about it, it's so difficult to subvert this form, which in itself is, parodic, funny. It's almost like, some kind of satirical view of 19th century in itself, this very idea of this German Austrian musical or operetta. So I think it's very difficult to subvert it, and I think Hitchcock wasn't really striving so hard to subvert it and make something kind of ironic of it. I think he's in between. There are many funny scenes, but also this conflict with the father, or with Jesse Matthews' character when he's tried to be a proper future husband. They are taken quite seriously. The other thing is I found somewhere this opinion that this movie is good in musical terms when it comes to the arrangement and everything. But also, there was also this comment, but it's not as good as what Korngold and Steiner were doing in Hollywood. And I think the person who wrote it, unfortunately I don't remember, didn't know that Korngold was involved in the process. And I liked Korngold a lot because he composed this awesome symphony that I heard live in Poland. So he also had the other foot, this classical music foot, not only doing film music. So these are just some footnotes to all of that. But your question was about if we could really get into this operetta mood, right? I would say I was preparing to this episode by watching also some early René Clair movies that I haven't seen before. I saw Nulla Liberté years ago, and then I saw Les Mignons very recently, and I saw it with my fiancée, who's crazy about musicals. And I must say, despite the fact that I love old stuff, I think this kind of narratives is really difficult for us to get into. I mean, this world of operetta, of this light-hearted musicals, as I mentioned, it's so far away from our taste that it's really like this archaeology of taste, I would say. It's something that is vanished. Of course, you have live performances of operetta still, but I think mostly in this, let's say, second-rate theaters nowadays, right? So it's, I think, part of the world that is really vanishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about it too, and I think that, we are already sort of after the revolution, because it's very, very difficult to watch a film which is concerned with issues of creativity in music, let's say, and not filter it through, decades upon decades now of rock music and of how much rock and roll and its mystique completely colonized the imagination in terms of, what music is, and with its, very elaborate sanctification of self-destruction, which basically, throughout the second half of 20th century, it was self-destructive mystique that was connected to rock stars, to those suicidal, drug-addicted and sexually transgressive figures who completely took over our imaginations. And compared to them drinking themselves to death, fucking themselves to death, Strauss composing his little waltz as he's eating his strudel, it's very 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 tame, and it's there are so many layers of pop culture that are intervening with this, that I think it can only be enjoyed either very naively by someone who is simply not aware of what happened, or just as a sort of a costume ball in which we very consciously, put on this costume of innocence and forget what happened in Vienna, let's say, later on, right? So it is a historical artifact. I think it may be a wonderful... I think it may work for children as a sort of introduction to musicals, to waltzes. But it is an artifact. It's a musty, dusty piece of old furniture, which surprised me by how beautifully it was crafted. But that's just about it.
Yeah, but I think your question is relevant. I mean, I think the question you're asking is, what about innocence in movies and innocence in musicals? Of course, Hollywood musicals many of them were innocent until 1950s, even if this innocence was faked. But also we have Jacques Demy, who's trying to, in Europe, he's trying to restore this innocence in a way in Umbrellas of Cherbourg and The Girls from Rochefort, and so on and so on. So I think it's an interesting point. But also, since I did this bit of research, I also want to say that I saw another 1934 British musical, just to compare it with, Waltzes from Vienna, to give our listeners and myself, this bit larger perspective. So on the one hand, we have Evergreen, as I mentioned, which was heavily inspired by Hollywood musicals, and in Evergreen we really have this extraordinary 10-minute, for example, musical number that is really very lavishly produced. There is this hourglass that is taking us back 10, 20 years earlier. We see this kind of like musical number inspired by Metropolis. So it's really awesome. That's a really quite a big budget musical. Then we have Waltzes from Vienna, privately produced by Tom Arnold. So this musical produced kind of outside the British studio system in a way. And then I also saw this movie that really gave me a perspective and is quite unique. The title is Sing As We Go, and I found it in BFI 100 Film Musicals. This short book in which, of course, Evergreen also features. And Sing As We Go is we could say it's a leftist British musical made in 1934, so in the same year. Set in contemporary times and featuring another famous British musical actress, Gracie Fields. And what is interesting is that both Gracie Fields and Jessie Matthews, both of them had this working class roots, and Jessie Matthews had to erase her Cockney accent, almost like in a Pygmalion story. And Gracie Fields was called our Gracie, this people's Gracie, so this charismatic actress who could sing, who could both. There's this great quote that she could both embody working class and Britain and empire, and she could embody everything because she was so a universal British personality loved by the people. And it's one of the rare musicals that really addresses the Great Depression. So that's why it's so unique. So we see that it wasn't like that, like in 1930s, they were making only this, let's say, derivative musicals inspired by Lubitsch and Eric Charel's The Congress Dances, but there were also this, attempts to make something more contemporary, something addressing the world nowadays, similar to, for example, Gold Diggers of 1933. So we have this associations with everyday life, but it's not a very good movie. It's worth watching because of the performance of Gracie Fields, and basically, as I've read in the book British Film Music and Film Musicals, there is a chapter about British musicals, and there were very many British musicals made in this decade, but most of them were star vehicles for well-known performers and even for well-known groups. So this landscape is quite interesting. I don't know much more about it. It's still ripe for exploration by cinephiles.
Yes, and definitely we recommend checking those out. I know that I would love to. Early American musicals are also, they have some elements of this, what you mentioned, of the sort of social consciousness. So there are wonderful books that we plan to read and that we also recommend. My favorite about early musicals is Dancing in the Dark, which is there are wonderful passages on it. But basically, yes, Waltzes from Vienna, Hitchcock 1934, and we are just about to hit the stride of great Hitchcock successes. Actually, next time we will talk about a film that was called a comeback for Hitchcock, because people even then felt that he was meandering a little bit, and this will be The Man Who Knew Too Much. So thank you so much for joining us on Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock. It was great to discuss this lesser known Hitchcock musical. There won't be any more of those. So it was wonderful to talk to you as always. And please follow us on Facebook. We have a fan page, Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock. Do like us, do comment, do please share, because this is a non-profit podcast made by two Hitchcock fans, and we hope that you will join us next time on Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.